Good evening, everyone. Yeah, so as you've probably seen from the slide, my name is Tom Hickling. I'm a program manager in Microsoft, looking after WVD. So for the next, what is it now, 50 minutes or so, tell me when to stop, Phil. We're just going to cover this loose agenda. So just an intro to what Windows Virtual Desktop is, connectivity into the service, because that's what lots of customers ask, just a tiny bit around licensing and costs. And then we'll finish with the roadmap, which is probably where we might spend most of the time, depending on how we go, because that's probably the most interesting for anybody that does know anything about WVD. But anyway, for those that don't, this is, we'll start off with an intro. So the question is, what is Windows Virtual Desktop? So essentially, this is a service that Microsoft owns and operates on behalf of our customers for the orchestration and connectivity through to virtual desktops. And that can be either in the VDI use case or in the RDSH remote desktop session host, i.e. Windows Server with the RDS role, which allows multiple users to log into the same VDI, to the same VM at the same point in time. So those are the two traditional delivery mechanisms, and they've existed for 20 odd years or whatever it might be. So this is a service that we operate. Customers don't have to do anything besides consume it. Now, if you've done anything in this space, you would have obviously have heard of the acronym of RDS, Remote Desktop Services. That's been in Windows Server since Windows NT, so about 27 years ago. And that has evolved over time with effectively every release of Windows Server. This, however, is not just the next version. This is a substantial major evolution of that capability, and we'll explain in a minute why we say that this is major evolution. As part of WVD, we have a new feature called Windows 10 Multisession. Now, that is a feature of WVD. It is not a SKU of Windows that you can purchase and download and run anywhere. It can only be run inside of WVD. We do support Windows 7, and we're getting, or customers are getting, what remains of 3 years of free extended security updates. And that commenced on the 14th of January 2021. Or was it 2020? I can't remember now. It seems like so long ago. But effectively, there's some runway left for customers that haven't managed to work their way off of Windows 7. If they move that into WVD, they will then receive free extended security updates. So it's a bit of roadmap. Runway, I should say, for customers to then get off of Windows 7. Like I said, it supports Windows Server, and that's Windows Server 2012 R2 and up. And it's one single service for the management of both published apps and published desktops. Now, that's perhaps might be a bit of a moot point to some people, but that's really there to differentiate this service against AWS Workspaces and AppStream, which is two products, two parts of the AWS portal, and two costs associated with that. And whilst this runs exclusively inside of Azure, it's actually a feature of M365. So what that means is that you can take advantage of any of the features of M365 that are relevant to a virtual desktop deployment. So things like Azure AD, which is actually a requirement, but conditional access, which is a feature of Azure AD, which is obviously a feature of M365, and any of the other capabilities inside of there which are relevant. So where does this all come from? So we talked about this being a major evolution. Let's look back at the heritage that this has come from. So if you have been around for a while, like myself, more so perhaps like Phil, he's getting on a bit now, you might have seen that our first foray into this space was terminal services, which was a role on Windows Server going back to the days of NT. That then evolved into remote desktop services, which is the name that has stuck through various versions of Windows Server. If you were around in the early days of Azure, we had a service called Azure Remote App, which was effectively RDS as a service delivered from Azure. Now that, unfortunately, went end of life a few years back, and it was, in fact, the very first Azure service to go end of life. But that led on to, there was massive amounts of learnings inside of Microsoft about how to run this service. That then changed into a preview product that was called Remote Desktop Modern Infrastructure. Fortunately, that name didn't stick. And that very quickly evolved into Windows Virtual Desktop, which is where we are today. The point being here is this is not new in terms of the overall capability. It's got that rich heritage, but what's new is, I suppose, the platform that's delivering this. So we can say that Windows Virtual Desktop is not just the next version of RDS. It's not just the next VDI product that comes off of the production line, so to speak. What it is a virtual desktop service that's delivered by Azure, and it's Azure that's making the difference here. So Azure, as you're probably aware on this, because of everybody on this group, Azure is a hyperscale cloud, 64 regions, more have been announced recently, more will continue to be announced over the coming years. Millions of servers in these regions, lots and lots of first-party Microsoft services, some of which are applicable, and lots of partner services in our marketplace, some of which are applicable to a virtual desktop service. The point here is it's Azure that is making the difference here around the capability that we can present to our customers effectively. And just to sort of demonstrate what that means is, these are some updates that have gone into WVD specific since June of last year. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these, but it's really just there just to demonstrate that there's lots and lots of updates that have gone into the service by virtue of WVD being dependent upon Azure as opposed to Windows Server. So we have now broken this dependency on RDS capabilities and broken that relationship between Windows Server. So we're not going to wait for 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it might be, for the next version of Windows to come along before we can drop in new features into WVD. We can now drop in features as soon as we think they're ready and as soon as we can get them out of the door effectively. Hence why we had that long list of new features that dropped into the service. So this is what the architecture, the high-level architecture looks like. And there's effectively two components or two areas of components that you really need to be interested in. The first is that box at the top, which is managed by Microsoft. So this is what we refer to as the WVD control plane or management service, whatever it might be. This is the bit that Microsoft manages on your behalf. And inside of there are all of the roles that are required to enable the orchestration and connectivity to the VMs. Now, like I said, inside of there are not lots of Windows servers. So we're not running lots of Windows servers and then presenting the service out. Like I said, we've broken that dependency on Windows Server. And what we've actually done is modernize the RDS code and ported it over to Azure App Service. Now, I'm sure everyone on the call knows what Azure App Service is, but for those that don't, it's a global web hosting platform, a first-class citizen inside of Azure. And we've got lots of customers whose entire business is based upon an Azure App Service website. So think of, I think our number one example is ASOS, so the online clothes retailer. Their entire business is based upon a website that they're hosting on Azure App Service. So what that then enables is what I said earlier, that we can now drop in feature updates into our service because it's now residing upon another global Azure service. And that applies to all of those roles that you see here. Now, what that means is to you is that you don't have to go and do anything in terms of procurement, ordering, taking delivery of servers, racking and stacking, installation, deployment, break fix, patching, whatever it is. You don't have to do anything whatsoever. You just consume this as a service. So that sort of takes care of that top box, the management plane. Now, just for reference, users connect through two additional Microsoft cloud services, and those are Azure Front Door, which is a layer 7 network traffic load balancing service, and that is our global entry point into the service. Now, that actually resides in not just Azure Regions, but a whole host of other Azure or Microsoft POP locations. So it's not an out-and-out Azure service, it's a wider service, so it's a Microsoft cloud service, in conjunction with Azure Traffic Manager, which will detect your DNS location and direct you to the closest iteration of the control plane, which exists in our Azure regions. And we'll go on, the next slide will show where those are geographically. So that's the top box. The second box down is your Azure subscription, or your partner's subscription, or any Azure subscription for that matter. This is where you have complete and utter control around what it is you architect and what you then go and deploy inside of that Azure subscription. So you could go and deploy 100, 1,000 VMs, whatever it might be. This is where you would go and ultimately manage those virtual machines going forward. Microsoft gets no visibility inside of there. We don't want anything to do with your Azure subscription. This is utterly down to you, and in fact, we can't touch it. The only mechanism for getting access to that is via a support ticket where you raise a request for, I can't remember what the terminology is now, but there is a terminology for that that enables our support people to look inside of your Azure subscription. But obviously, we don't have that capability outside of that support process. Now, all of those virtual machines can either connect back to on-premises if you've got ExpressRoute or a VPN. Now, that's ideal for connecting back to any application backends or storage locations that you might have. And they can also reach out directly to the internet, so they can go and be consuming Office 365, Teams, or any other SaaS-based application that you might be hosting as well. Now, all of those VMs will obviously reside upon our IaaS platform. So we manage up to and including the hypervisor. You manage from the operating system up. Now, this slide is just showing you the Azure regions and the WVD gateway locations, or control plane, I should say. Now, the blue dots are the 64 Azure regions that we currently have. There will be more blue dots over time. Like I think earlier this week, we announced plans to deploy an Azure region in Malaysia. So we'll have to add a blue dot there. But the red dots are the gateway locations through which you connect through to your virtual machines. So like I said, these all sit behind Azure Traffic Manager and Azure Front Door. We determine where you are basically, or where your DNS location is, and then we'll connect you to the closest red dot that you see on here. And then we will then connect you onward to the virtual machine that you've chosen to deploy in any of those Azure regions. So if you are in UK South, for example, that does have a WVD control plane, and you've chosen to place your VM in UK South, then it'll be a very, very tiny network hop from our gateway over to your VM across the Microsoft backbone. If you're located in the UK, but you've chosen to place a VM, let's just say in UAE Central, where we don't have a control plane, then you will be accessing that VM across the Microsoft backbone. So it's still the quickest mechanism of getting there, but obviously we can't do anything with physics, so it will take as long as it takes to effectively get there. However, we do have some users who have got globally distributed users, and we don't really hear many complaints, particularly if it's not too far, like halfway around the globe tends to be okay. If you're going all the way around it, it might be noticeable to your users. So just to cover off the OSs, we kind of mentioned this, but we support Windows 7, that's single session, so the true VDI use case, one user, one VM at any one point in time. That's published desktops only. Windows 10 Enterprise, single session, so that's your VDI use case. And then our multi-session OSs, like I mentioned earlier, Windows 10, Server 2012, 2016, and 2019. So that's our shared sessions or multi-session, as we tend to refer to it as now. So let's just talk briefly around Windows 10 multi-session and what that is. Up until this point in time, our customers have had only two choices of the types of hosts that they enable for their users to connect. And they are described here. So Windows Server on the left, Windows Client on the right-hand side. So Windows Server has been particularly good because it is cheaper, because of this RDS capability, having multiple users on the same VM at the same point in time. So customers typically start down that road first in order to reduce cost. Now, it's Windows Server under the hood. You can make it look like Windows Client, so users might not be able to tell, but IT definitely understands the difference and will manage it differently. Like I said, it's multiple sessions, Win32 apps only. So basically what that's saying is nothing from the Microsoft Store. That may or may not be a problem. It supports Office 365 Pro Plus and it's in our long-term servicing channel. Basically, you get an update to Windows Server every 4 or 5, 6 years, whatever it might be. Now, the problem with Windows Server has been that some of the time, some customers come up against some apps that don't work on Windows Server. So there's some application compatibility issues. Now, when customers come up against those apps, they tend to mitigate them in perhaps one of two ways. The first is to go and buy some third-party software that can fool the operating system into thinking the app works, or vice versa, or for modifying the application to force it to work. That often comes at a cost. Or they go and deploy Windows Client using one of the Windows Client operating systems, predominantly now Windows 10, where typically there is a significantly reduced amount of application compatibility issues because the vast majority of client applications are developed against Windows Client to start with. So Windows 10 Client, obviously, the downside is you need more infrastructure for the same number of users because there's no sharing capability. However, it does support every type of app, so Win32 as well as anything from the store. It does support Office 365 Pro Plus and it's in our semi-annual channel, which means you get 2 updates a year, one of which you can defer. Now, what we've done with Windows 10 Multisession is effectively plug the gap in between both of these and brought the best of both worlds together. So what Windows 10 Multisession is, as the name suggests, is the RDS capability from Windows Server combined with the user experience that most users have come to expect from Windows 10. So it's the multiple sessions, it supports every app out there in terms of Win32 and the apps from the Microsoft Store. It's Office 365 Pro Plus. It's in our semi-annual channel as well, as you would imagine. So effectively what that means is you've got an evergreen version of Windows 10 with an evergreen version of Office 365 on there and being delivered and orchestrated by an evergreen control plane. Hence why we like to think of this as being sort of the best of both worlds here. Now, the virtual machines that are available inside of WVD are effectively any VM that's available in the region that you're deploying into. Now, this is by no means an exhaustive list, and you probably know these VMs as well as I do. The point here is you get the full choice and flexibility about delivering the VMs that you want for your different use cases inside of your organizations. Now, I know from past experience doing this myself as a customer of Microsoft and in my role now at Microsoft speaking to customers who are doing this, particularly doing this on premises, they tend to keep the number of virtual machine sizes that they make available to their organization to a bare minimum. So typically it's 3, but it might be 4 or 5, whatever. So it's really like a small, medium and large. Anything else is handled as an exception. Now, IT does that to keep their life simple, because if they've got to manage lots of different virtual machine sizes, that adds extra complexity and cost that they need to bear. In Azure, as you're, I'm sure, no doubt aware, it takes exactly the same amount of time to deploy any of these VMs. So you might have a use case inside of your organization where a group of users need an application that has specific requirements in terms of, let's say, additional memory over CPU, or the reverse of that. Or you might have some designers, some graphic designers or engineers that need some visualization capability. So they need AutoCAD, for example. Now, if you're doing AutoCAD and you're doing VDI on premises, then you probably have to go and get some high-powered servers with GPUs inside of them. That's cost and complexity and delay waiting for it to arrive. Or you go and give that engineer a high-powered workstation device, stick it under their desk, and they use that GPU doing their day job. The beauty of Azure is it takes about 5 minutes to go and deploy one of these N series, some extra time to integrate it with WVD, admittedly, but you don't pay for anything up front, and you only pay for the seconds that these VMs are powered on. So there's much more benefit that you if you are in sort of the end user computing space inside of your organization, you can provide all of these benefits to Azure to those users far, far easier and quicker than you could if you were doing this yourselves on premises, outside of obviously the benefits of the cloud, or the benefits of Azure in this case. Now, we typically have a very corporate slide around use cases, and they go and talk about specific use cases that WVD is particularly good for. And there are some use cases where it is particularly good for. The reality is, however, that there's only really one use case that is not supported, and that is offline mode. So, and that's obviously because we need connectivity into Azure. So the point here is that use cases are effectively, and perhaps this is oversimplifying it, but use cases are, there are people out there, there are human beings that need access to a set of applications in order to be successful in their job. So that might be a graphics designer who needs AutoCAD. It could be a doctor who needs access to some on-premises proprietary application that's managing patient data, for example. Those use cases are very similar in the sense that it's a human being that needs access to some applications whilst they're doing their job. It doesn't really matter that much about the application because, like I said, we've got VMs to support that particular use case. So the use cases for WVD are essentially, you've got some users that need access to some applications in order to do their day job. Those are the use cases for WVD. So let's just change tack a bit and move over to connectivity. So this is that sort of architecture laid on its side that we saw earlier, starting on the left with our clients that we support. So we've got an HTML5 client, Android, Mac OS, iOS, and Windows. We also have a Linux SDK, which thin client vendors are using to integrate WVD into their existing thin OSs. In the middle, we have the control plane, and on the right-hand side, we have your Azure subscription with your VMs running in them. So the process for connectivity is a user will launch that client on whatever device they're running on, and across the internet will connect to the control plane and then will be redirected to Azure Active Directory for authentication. AAD will return to them an OAuth 2 token that is then presented to our web access and brokering services inside of the control plane to determine which resources this particular user is authorized to consume. They will then click on an icon to try to connect to that VM. That connection will go via our gateway and our brokering service again, and will then connect them through to that virtual machine. At this point in time, we have RDP traffic that's flowing from the left all the way through to the right-hand side. All very straightforward. Now, in order to improve connectivity, we have this new capability called Reverse Connect, and you might have seen that zero outbound connection is already established prior to a user connecting. Now, what actually happens is there's an agent on this VM which reaches out to our control plane when it boots up to basically announce itself and to say, I'm ready to accept a connection. The steps in that previous slide happen, and a user then will try to connect. And all that actually happens is that previous slide happens, but our brokering service connects that inbound connection to that outbound connection from the virtual machine. And all that is a single outbound WebSocket connection over port 443 to our control plane. So what that means is to you is that you do not need any inbound ports opened to these VMs inside of your Azure subscription. So they are totally private and completely and utterly locked down. The only mechanism to connect to these VMs is an incoming connection that's gone through the management plane, i.e. the user's been authenticated and their connection is being brokered inside of our control plane to that VM. So we've significantly reduced the attack surface of these virtual machines inside of your Azure subscription. So on top of that, we also encrypt all of the traffic. So the virtual machine, when it boots up, like I said, that agent reaches out. Now it does that inside of a TLS 1.2 encrypted channel to our gateway service. And that's just the brokering comms basically saying, you know, I'm here, I can accept a connection. The client also establishes a similar TLS 1.2 connection to the gateway. And that traffic is encrypted using a certificate that Microsoft manages on that gateway. When the user then goes and launches a desktop, then the RDP traffic, which is transmitting the screen updates on the session host on the right-hand side, that is also encrypted inside of, and sorry, that's a TLS 1.2 encrypted channel again. That goes inside of the first tunnel. So effectively, the RDP traffic has been encrypted twice to get through to that VM. And that encryption is done using a certificate that is on the session host or the VM that you're connecting to. Now, we do not manage that certificate. We deploy it as through the deployment process, but you can go and change that if you wanted to. So you can go and put your own certificate on there. We mentioned clients, so I won't go through that. We mentioned the Thing client support. So in addition to the Linux SDK, we do also have the Windows 10 IoT Enterprise support for Thing clients. And we have a handful of Thing client vendors out there who already have updated their Thin OSs to support WVD by virtue of this Linux SDK. So people like iGel, N Computing, Stratadesk, and I think the latest was Dell. But people like HP and the others, in fact, I think there's another one, Tenzig, I think they're called, also support this. So that list is growing. So potentially, if you have got an existing Thin client vendor, they will also be supporting WVD if they're not today, in the near future. Okay, just to cover off licensing, I know it's a little bit of a boring topic, but most of our customers, most of our, I suppose, larger customers are already entitled to WVD. Now, that is because WVD is not a licensed product on its own right. You can't just go and buy WVD. It's actually licensed through, or entitled, I should say, through another license. And that is effectively M365 or Windows licensing directly. So M365 E3 and above, including, sorry, A3, and Windows 10 E3 and above. So if you've got any of those licenses that you can see on the left, you can effectively go and deploy WVD today. If you do choose to deploy Windows Server, however, there is still a requirement for a CAL. That's not applicable for Windows 10 multi-session. In addition to that, so let's just say you've got M365 E3 licensing. What that means is you don't need to buy any license to use WVD, but you will have Azure usage charges. So if you do deploy 100 VMs, then your Azure bill would reflect those 100 VMs and the associated disks, etc. So this gives you the opportunity to look at some of the cost-saving mechanisms, i.e. powering off these virtual machines, because like I said, we only charge per second that they're powered on. And we have some WVD tooling today, and we'll have some enhanced tooling going forward that provides you the capability of powering off these VMs on schedules and when users disconnect and that kind of thing. Or you can combine reserved instances where you pre-commit for 1 or 3 years to a reduced rate compared to pay as you go. Now, there is a balancing act about determining which will be the cheapest. I think reserved instances based upon 1 and 3 years, I think it's roughly 240 and 300 hours per month. If you can power it off outside of those times, you will save costs. If you need to keep them on for longer, reserved instances would more than likely be cheaper, and then you don't even have to worry about powering the VMs off. Some of the cost benefits are here. So obviously Windows 10, as we mentioned, multi-session, I should say, Windows 10 multi-session provides you the scale from Windows Server, but delivering it at the multi-session cost of Windows 10. So we combine the two, as we mentioned earlier. If you are deploying Windows 10 multi-session, there's no requirement for a CAL. So this makes it much more cost-effective compared to Windows Server. So if you don't have a requirement for Windows Server, then our recommendation is go with Windows 10 multi-session and save yourself the cost of a CAL. Now, whilst you do require a CAL if you are deploying Windows Server, you don't need a Windows Server license inside of WVD. And that is because of the fourth point, which is that all WVD VMs are charged at the base compute rate or the Linux rate. Now, VMs inside of Azure have two costs, the Windows or the Linux rate. And the Linux rate is basically the cost of the VM minus the Windows license for the duration that that's being powered on. So that can be a significant discount. And the reason that they're charged at that cheaper rate is because WVD is entitled through some licensing that also includes your rights to Windows Server. So we're not going to charge you twice for effectively the Windows license running on these virtual machines. So WVD will always be the cheapest place that you can run Windows VMs effectively. As with the vast majority of things in Azure, it's all OpEx. So this enables you to pay monthly, so nothing needs to be paid up front. So that use case of a designer that needs access to a GPU where you go and spend £5,000 on an expensive workstation device before it's even arrived, that's not the case here. You only pay when you start consuming and only the duration that you are consuming anything. And because this is a management service where we've taken away a lot of the complexity, that enables you to concentrate on things that are more valuable inside of your organization, which is typically providing access to applications and data and other value add services that your user estate would require to be successful in their day job. Okay, so that's kind of the intro to WVD. We've got 20 minutes or so left. We'll just cover off our roadmap. Now, this is already out of date, unfortunately. Not unfortunately, which is, it's a good thing because this is ever changing. But some of these things that you see on here have actually gone GA between the last time I updated these slides. So some of this, if you are keeping sort of abreast of WVD, some of these things might be, you might be fully aware of them. Some of the other things, perhaps not. So we'll just start off with a thing that has actually gone GA, which is called Msix App Attach, which is a mechanism for dynamic application delivery. Now, what this does is it separates applications from operating systems. Now, if you're doing physical devices, if you're delivering laptops to users, let's just say, the user profile and the applications are intrinsically linked into the operating system for that laptop. And they're not separate. They don't exist anywhere else separate from that laptop. Hence, if your laptop packs up or it's stolen and you get a new one, applications need to be reinstalled. Your user profile, your persona is not there. So you need to reconfigure the look and feel of the operating system back to how you like it. So what App Attach is trying to do is to breaking down that monolithic structure. Now, inside of WVD, we've already got half the way there with a product called FS Logics, which manages the user profile separately from the VM. So it will go and store the user profile on some storage and then bring that into any VM that you log into on any given day. Hence, your user profile is permanently available and permanently up to date, irregardless of where you're consuming that from. App Attach is trying to do exactly the same thing, but doing it for your applications. So separating those applications from any machine that you log into on any given day. Now, that's particularly relevant in what we refer to as the pooled model of WVD, i.e. you've got a pool of VMs, let's just say 100, and that's supporting, let's just say 1,000 users. They can log into any one of those VMs on any given day, but they want their user experience to be the same and, crucially, get access to the same apps every single day. So rather than deploying, let's just say 3,000 apps out to those 100 VMs, you just need to make them available in MSIX format, and WVD will do the job of delivering that application to any particular user on any given day. So what this looks like is coming up now. Now, the first thing that's worth mentioning, actually, that this Msix App Attach is two things combined. MSIX is our new packaging format, which effectively replaces everything that's gone before it. So AppV, MSI, XEs, whatever it might be, we're encouraging, and we've got lots of developers out there and vendors that have already sort of migrated their applications into MSIX format. So that predates WVD. In fact, it's got nothing to do with WVD. However, App Attach is a WVD specific service which does the mounting, which we'll see in a minute, of those MSIX applications. So what this looks like is a user today will sign into WVD, they will get their resource feed, which presents them with a set of icons. They'll click on one of those and connect through to a virtual machine. The user's profile is then loaded via FSLogix from some storage, and their persona is then presented onto that VM. Hence, their user experience looks identical to when they logged out the previous day. At the same point, WVD will read the applications that have been assigned to this user, and then will mount some VHDs that contain those applications into the VM that they've connected to. And in fact, that actually happens prior to them logging in. It will then register the applications that are present in that VHD with the operating system and present some icons, and then the user can go and launch that application. So what that enables organizations to do is to move from the left-hand side, which is a traditional delivery mechanism, through to the right-hand side, which is, I suppose, the modern dynamic method of doing this. Now, if you've done this before, you're probably aware, and you spent many hours deploying and configuring this, but lots of organizations have many silos of VMs siloed for a specific set of applications and thus users. So in this example, we've got sales, HR, and engineering. Those images for those three silos in this case will have diverged over time. So they will be different over time. And what that means is that if you needed to go and deploy an update to the sales image, then there's a task to roll that image out across all of the VMs for that silo. If you need to roll it out across all VMs in your estate, then that's 3 images that need to be updated and then rolled out. If you want to then go and deploy a common app or update a common app, that needs to be pushed out across all VMs, across all silos. If you're pushing out a departmental app, let's just say sales, then you need to push that out to that particular silo. The point here is there's lots of admin and management that you have to do and things that could potentially go wrong because there's so many tasks. What App Attach will do is allow you to move to the model where you have one single golden image, and once that's rolled out, you don't really care too much about it. This is the cattle versus pets analogy, where these are just VMs and you don't really care too much about them. Obviously, you do care about them, but you don't care about them in the same manner as you did because they were dedicated for particular users. We manage the user profile, like we said, with FSLogix, and then any type of application, there are some limits. Not all apps are supported with MSIX, but the vast majority of apps will go to MSIX. You can then push or deliver those applications dynamically to any user that's signed into any VM in your estate. If you need to update it, all that you need to do is update the application once and then make that available. And then users, when next time they sign in, then can consume the newer version of that application. No longer do you need to update the image or update the individual app and then use some software distribution tool to roll it out to 50 VMs, for example. Now, what does that look like? I've got a little video here just to demonstrate what this looks like. Now, I have to stress this is absolutely not the user experience. This is behind the scenes just to show people like yourselves what's actually happening through this process of attaching these applications. So what you'll see here is add remove programs. You'll see that there's no Power BI present. Then we have Disk Manager. You'll see there's just 2 disks mounted. And then PowerShell, which is my mechanism of initiating this. Now, we don't need PowerShell because the WVD control plane will take care of this end to end. But this is, like I said, just to demonstrate how this all functions. So I'll just play this video. The user is now going to search for Power BI. They'll see it's not present. So as an admin, I'm just running this script. This will then mount a VHD within less than a second. And then when the user goes to search for Power BI is now present on this VM. There was a little bug when this was done about a year back. It wasn't showing the correct icon. But anyway, as you can see now, Power BI is now launching on this virtual machine, even though it's not installed. It's been registered with the OS, obviously, to be able to launch it. And then Power BI at this point is behaving just like it would behave if it was installed locally. The user could not tell that that's not installed locally. I then come and run a detach script. What this does is it unregisters the app and dismounts that VHD that contains the app. Come and search for Power BI, it's no longer present on that VM. So what this enables you to do, like I said, is really not to care too much about these VMs, because you can get any app out to any VM when the user needs it. So this enables that cattle mentality and the I suppose the capability of having one image that has your OS and any core components, and then all applications can be delivered dynamically and then presented to users at the point that they need it. In the WVD context, what that looks like is much like that slide slightly earlier, but a user, like I said, will sign in. Sorry, the first step, is that an admin needs to add the MSIX packages in the WVD control plane to the particular host pool that has that you're assigning this to. When a user signs in, before that, the WVD control plane will instruct a random session host in that host pool to go and read the VHD. At this point in time, it's interrogating the VHD or VHDX or SIMFS, which is a different file system than VHD, which is far quicker and has lower resource usage requirements. It will go and read that VHD, read the application, check that there's the certificate, it's in the right format. If that all passes, then it will then go and effectively register that application with its host pool. At this point in time, the other VMs in that host pool don't know anything about this application. But within 5 minutes, and that can be configured, all of the session hosts, all of the remaining session hosts themselves will just check in with the control plane to see if there's any new apps that need to be mounted. They will then read the VHD, mount the VHD, and then the user is going to sign in, and the applications are registered with the OS for that user at that point in time. So there are actually 2 steps. The VHD being mounted, which enables the application to be, or to move to the next step. So the application is there, but not registered with the OS for anybody. So nobody can see it, nobody can launch it. When the user signs in through the control plane and gets onto the session host, then the application is registered and an icon is displayed for the user. And this is what it looks like inside of the WVD control plane. As you would imagine, it's just another entry inside of there. So let's move on to the next roadmap item, which is a feature called Azure Active Directory Join, which will provide Intune management for your WVD session hosts. Today, we support Windows 10 single session. We don't support Windows 10 multi-session. This piece of work will provide that capability. Now, if you have done WVD, you will be aware of these requirements. If you're not, the requirements today for identity are that we need hybrid identity. So we need your user identities to be present in Active Directory or Azure Active Directory domain services, but both of those deliver traditional Active Directory, as well as Azure Active Directory. The VMs that you connect to need to be joined to either AD or AAD-DS. We also do support hybrid join, but that's perhaps another topic. But basically, that's the requirement for identity. But what customers are asking us is, can we effectively remove Active Directory? We want the VMs to be joined just to Azure Active Directory and users only authenticate against Azure AD. So what this will then enable is effectively the removal of Active Directory in the WVD context. So WVD will no longer require you to have WVD. We're not going to take away the capability, but we won't force you to have Active Directory. Now, you would probably still have lots of other services that do require Active Directory. So we're not saying you can remove Active Directory from your environment altogether, but no longer will WVD require it. That introduces less complexity. It will also introduce modern passwordless authentication mechanisms. So Windows Hello for Business, FIDO2 Authenticator, as you see there. It crucially will also bring end-to-end single sign-on. So you'll be able to sign on to your local Windows 10 VM if it's also joined to the same Azure AD, and then have single sign-on all the way through the WVD control plane, the WVD session host, and then through to Office and any other applications that you've secured behind Azure AD. It will also support non-Azure AD joined devices. So if let's just say you're on a different, bring your own device or a Mac OS or whatever it might be, we will provide single sign-on from the point that you authenticate to Azure AD. So that might be when you launch the WVD client, but that will single sign you onto the session host. It will provide then MEM support or Intune. Intune's part of MEM or Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So that gives you the single pane of glass for the management of all of your virtual machines and physical devices for that matter. It will also bring future support for things like Azure AD B2B and B2C. So this is the ability to have external identities present inside or invited into your directory, and then you present them services, as well as B2C, which is the ability to offload the authentication request to things like Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, and other identity providers. And then if the user is successfully authenticated, they can come back into WVD and access their service. And Intune will also provide this new policy authoring engine that has lots of settings categorized based upon the operating system that you are configuring. In this case, the one that's relevant is Windows 10 Multisession. So you'll be able to go and find Windows 10 Multisession settings and then apply them directly in Intune and apply those over your virtual machines. What that looks like, if you haven't already seen it, this is the Intune Portal. You'll see Enterprise Multisession on the right. Those are the new VMs that we support. The point here is you've got one single control or pane of glass for the management of all of your devices that you're supporting. And just as I suppose as a representation of that, this is what that looks like. So users will sign into Azure AD, connect to the session host, single sign on to the session host, and then be seamlessly managed by Intune. And like I said, future support for external and partner and consumer-based identities. Okay, Tom, yes.
Just a time check with you.
Yeah.
And we're nearly at 1:30, so. And there was one question just quickly. Sure. Darren was making reference to the fact that you used the term golden image and the fact it's a bit of a dated term.
Yeah. Yes, admittedly it is. I think it's just a hangover, I suppose. There is still a requirement for some kind of image that basically has your operating system in it, and that tends to get modified by customers to include whatever it is that they need in it. In the future, I think there will still be a requirement for a golden image or whatever the modern terminology is, because there will still be some customer-specific components that will probably still go into that base image. Now, it might be core components as opposed to sort of client applications, but I suppose the benefit here is we've stripped out the need to push all of your applications to certain images.
Okay.
Does that answer the question, hopefully?
Yeah, I think Darren was just asking if there was a more modern cloud native way. There's a bit of a chat going on in the chat window.
Oh, okay. Well, so there definitely are sort of modern ways of creating this image. So you can do it natively inside of Azure, or you can even, which I suppose is relatively modern, there are some even newer mechanisms. So there's a preview service called Azure Image Builder, which is a build service. So you tell the service what applications you want your image to contain, and it will then go off and build a VM and pull in those applications, install them, do some configuration steps, and then spit out a completed image. That uses a HashiCorp Packer. So it's from the same people that did Terraform. You could use Azure DevOps. Azure DevOps supports Packer as well, and there's lots of other third-party mechanisms for building these images. And there are also mechanisms, Azure DevOps being the perfect example, where you could automate this entire thing end-to-end. So you could push an update to your Azure Image Builder definition into your repo. Azure DevOps will pick that up, deploy or build an image, and then with a release pipeline, we'll then go and deploy that into WVD by either building a new host pool or updating an existing host pool with that updated image. That would probably take another entire session to go through all of that. We don't have time now, unfortunately.
So, are there any roadmap items that you'd want to go over quickly as a matter of sort of priority, or
is that me you're asking, or the audience?
No, you. I'm asking you.
So let's just have a quick look. We have this thing called anti-screen capture protection. So this hides the WVD session from the snipping tool, as well as any sharing applications, much like Teams or Zoom, whatever it is. That prevents the accidental dissemination of any information. So that's particularly relevant for customers that are in sort of high compliancy environments. Anybody that's done this will have also known that the metadata, so this is the configuration data about WVD, is stored in US regions. We have a public preview of the EU Azure regions for this, but only yesterday did we announce a private preview for UK Azure regions to support that. That will be going into public preview probably around the June timeframe, as will Japan, Canada, and Australia. So just look out for that, particularly for UK organisations that don't want their metadata to be stored in the UK. Maybe one other just to sneak in is this thing called Start VM on Connect. So this is the ability to have your end users power on their VM via the WVD client at just the point that they need it. So IT will power it off, perhaps every night, and then that will stay off until the point that the user clicks on the icon. So if they're on holiday for a week, that VM doesn't get powered on and incur costs for you. If they turn up the next day at 7:30 in the morning, the VM won't be powered on. They'll click on the icon, and the client will call into Azure Compute to power on that virtual machine and then connect them through to it. There are some other features in here, but I don't want to chew up too much time of your next session.
Cool. Well, we're going to go into a break, but I just want to ask if anyone's got any other questions for Tom before we let Tom go. Manish?
Hiya, Tom. Very nice session. Quite informative, yeah. I had two questions. You can hear me, yeah?
Yeah, sure, I can hear you.
Yeah. So the first question I had was, I was looking to this feature about the VHD mounting itself and then, pushing the applications across. Now, suppose I was to combine your cost-saving mechanism to VMSS, somehow have my goal to build done using the pipelines, and then, on demand, like we have multiple sessions, right, per VM. So, say if the sessions are going higher, more VMs are pumped in by VMSS in a pool. You see where I'm going with this, yeah?
Yeah.
So in that scenario, how will my applications then get installed from that VHD?
So if you're talking about Msix App Attach, applications, they don't ever get installed. That's the beauty of it. The applications are only present by virtue of this VHD being mounted. Now, like I said earlier, the process is the admin goes and assigns an application inside of the control panel or the control plane. The session host will go and mount the VHD, and then within 5 minutes, all of the other VMs in that host pool will have mounted the VHDs. So within 5 minutes or after 5 minutes, all of your users will be able to consume that application. And that's all that needs to be done. Now, if the VM is off, when it powers on, the WVD agent will go through this whole process and will also mount that VHD. Now, there possibly might be a small window of time between when it's powered on and that application is available. And if a user got in, possibly they might not be able to launch an application. But we're only talking about minutes here.
Okay. That can be combined with VMSS as well, yeah? So
No,
VMS
WVD doesn't today support scale sets, unfortunately. That is on our roadmap, but it's not it's not a committed work item at this point in time. Now, what might be of benefit is, so this Start VM on Connect today only supports personal desktops. So that's a VM that's dedicated to you and no one else can use it, which is ideal for this use case. What we are bringing, and in fact is already in private preview, is Start VM on Connect for pooled VMs. So this will enable you to have a pool of, let's just say 100 VMs and power them all off. When the first user connects, they will power on the first VM, and that VM will sit there until the number of users that you've defined in the host pool has been reached. So let's say it's 20. The 21st user, when they try to connect, will power on the second VM, and on and on and on. And then in the evening or at the weekend, you might have some Azure automation, or in fact, you might use an upcoming WVD service that's also on our roadmap that will provide you the capability built in to do the deallocation of those VMs.
Okay, that's sleek, yeah. So that's a sleek thing. Thank you.
That's all right, no problem.
Alistair, you've got a question as well?
Yeah, just a quickie. We're cloud only, so we need Azure AD join so we can do endpoint management. How do we get on the private preview?
So the private preview is technically closed because the product group got enough enough customers on there. What I will say is, unfortunately, those customers are not providing the feedback as quickly as the product group would like. So the product group are willing to take new customers. However, the criteria is you basically need to be up and running very, very quickly and provide your feedback as soon as possible. So, and there has to be a minimum, I think, of 5 users. So if you're in a position where you could say, I can sign up, I can get 5 users, and I will commit to providing some feedback, good, bad, indifferent, whatever it might be, that might swing it for you.
That sounds good. I was worried you were going to say 200 users, but no. So basically, what I'm having to do is temporarily build using group policy without any management, and then I'm going to have to rebuild whenever it gets launched. So it would be awesome if. Do I reach out to you or?
Yeah. Reach out to me, and we can discuss that.